All right, what's going on, you guys? Today we're going to be walking through how to build out an automated market analysis system. Now, in this video, we're going to be going through how to build out the backend, so all the API connections, as well as the front end, so that nice UI that you might have seen on my Instagram page. Now, I've been using this system for the past few months to stay on top of AI news, but I wanted to share it here since I've been getting a ton of questions asking how I'm able to stay up to date with AI and constantly create content around the latest news, updates, and use cases. The goal of this automation is to basically analyze where people vote with their attention, and then we want to leverage those market signals to get an informed view of any topic that we want. And even though we'll be walking through the AI news consolidator use case in this video, you can pretty much use this for any topic that you want to stay up to date with. Now, full disclaimer, I'm not saying that this is the most optimal market research system, right? This is just a system that I've been using, that I built out for myself, which has helped me stay on top of trends that I'm trying to keep up with. Obviously, the most important of which being recent and relevant AI news. Okay, but looking forward to sharing the system with you guys, and let's get right into it. All right, so just a brief look at the dashboard that we're gonna be building out, right? So you guys can kind of see the end product. We're basically gonna be building out this dashboard over here, which consolidates a bunch of different sources to generate us a comprehensive overview of what the market looks like today for whatever topic that we desire, right? So in my case, I want to look up AI news, and I basically just want to consolidate a bunch of different resources so I can get a comprehensive overview of what's trending in AI news today, what I should stay on top of, and what might be relevant for my particular use cases. And so over here, we can see that, I'll go over this in a second over here, but it's basically scraped a bunch of sources over here, right? We have Hacker News, X, Reddit, YouTube. We have Polymarket on the side here that we've scraped. And we also have some stuff over here. This is Archive and GitHub. And I'll get into all these sources in a second, but hopefully you can see just how comprehensive this really is and how it's able to find me exactly what topics I would be interested in from these particular sources and just consolidate it all over here. You can see over here, I can also get just a general summary of the top news stories today. So for example, as we know, GPT 5.6 released this week, and Fable 5 also turns to API-based pricing. So just a little bit of story here on comparing GPT 5.6 to Fable 5, some cost-benefit analysis, stuff like that. And also, since I'm running an AI agency, obviously, I'm interested in how this news can impact the agency that I'm running. Mostly obviously interested in cost efficiency, regulations could be a good long-term horizon thing to stay in touch with. And so this is all stuff that the scraper has basically consolidated for me about how this news might be relevant to my particular use case. The good thing about this is that I have all these sources in one particular place, right? I don't have to go ahead and scrape Twitter all by itself. I don't have to scrape Reddit, right? I literally just have to run this one particular workflow once whenever I want to get a general news briefing, right? Whether that be a daily cadence, a weekly cadence. So super convenient over here. And just to give you guys an overview of exactly which sources we're scraping. So in this particular video, I'm going to be walking through how to scrape sources relevant to the use case that I built this out for, which is an AI news generator. But you can obviously tailor these sources in your particular workflow to whatever you want, right? But for me personally, I'm interested in stuff like Hacker News, YouTube, Reddit threads, so what's generally trending on Reddit within the AI niche. Different tweets, what's trending on Twitter. Twitter tends to have more raw, unfiltered opinions, so I'm interested in those. Polymarket odds, basically seeing what exactly people are actually placing their money on. So this can be really helpful to analyze particular market trends, likelihood for events to happen, stuff like that. GitHub, I'm interested in trending repos. So what's really trending right now on GitHub? What are some particular use cases that I can maybe utilize for my own needs or maybe just stay up to date with? And also Archive, right? Archive is essentially, if you haven't used it before, it's a repository of scientific papers that have yet to be formally published. And so what I like about Archive is that the topics that are being posted on Archive are literally the cutting edge of whatever field they're in, right? So if there's an AI paper, that AI paper can be a good proxy for what we can expect to come in AI in the future, right? Some stuff that hasn't even been released yet in terms of research. And so by scraping Archive, I'm able to basically scrape the abstracts of all these papers and summarize them as if I were a fifth grader, right? Because obviously I'm not an AI research expert, so I don't really understand what a lot of this stuff means. So scraping Archive is a good way to basically get a foresight into the future of AI, or really whatever domain that you're interested in. You can see here on the dashboard also, I've consolidated a bunch of Archive papers that basically just walk me through exactly what the relevance of these are. So for example, Uniclaw, Bench, Universal Benchmark for Proactive Agents. I don't really know what that means, but over here it also gives me a summary. It said that scientists created a test course to check if AI robots can actually do real world tasks like a human would, instead of just doing things in pretend computer worlds. Okay, so general signal into where AI might be heading, right? These are just some other examples here. see our trending repos over there. And like I showed on the dashboard, we're going to be consolidating all of these resources that you see here, all these sources that you see here into two things, right? We're going to be consolidating them into a pulse check, and we're going to be consolidating them into domain relevance. Now the pulse check is what we saw here, right? Just summarizing the general story that's being told throughout all the sources that we scrape, right? What is the highest leverage thing that I need to know? And then the domain relevance is essentially over here, right? So for me, I'm interested in how it can affect my AI agency. These are basically 6 summary points of how the stuff that we scrape down here, Polymarket, Reddit, YouTube, X, Archive, can be relevant to my particular AI agency. All right, so that's a general overview of what we're going to be building out today. And now let's get into the fun part of actually building this out from scratch. All right, so I just created a new project inside of VS Code over here. You can see this is an empty project. The only thing I added over here is a .claude folder with this skill.md file. And I'll be attaching the skill.md file below so you guys can get access to it. But essentially, this file is just walking through exactly how we're going to draw information from all of the sources that we're looking to draw it from, right? As you saw on the dashboard, we're drawing information from a bunch of different sources, right? X, Reddit, Hacker News, all these places. And so we need to find an actual way that we can grab information from each of those sources. Now, I've curated a bunch of free ways that we can grab information from these sources, so we don't have to pay for any API keys or anything like that, right? Especially if you're not running this on a super regular basis, right? You probably only need to run something like this maybe once a week, something like that. And so I've just consolidated a bunch of free resources here. The only paid resource that I'm using is the resource that is used to scrape X, scrape Twitter, right? So that's the only paid resource here. But besides that, just to give you a quick walkthrough of exactly what we're scraping. So for Reddit, if you guys have been following my content for a little bit, I've been using something called the Reddit.json endpoint trick. That got patched about a month ago, I think, which maybe coincidentally or not, I was spamming my feed with a bunch of ways to utilize that. So I don't know if Reddit saw that. If they did, sorry that I might have been the reason for that to get patched. But anyways, we have another way here that's free. It's basically scraping the Reddit RSS feed and also using something called Arctic Shift, which is a free public Reddit archive, to backfill information from the posts that we scrape on Reddit, right? Because scraping on the RSS feed doesn't give us engagement signals. So we need to use Arctic Shift as well. But these are both free to use. And so we're going to be using this to scrape Reddit. Secondly, to scrape Hacker News, we're basically going to be using Algolia, which allows us to scrape Hacker News for free without an API key. So that one's pretty simple over there. Also GitHub has a free search API, which allows you to just scrape GitHub repos using their free API. So we're just going to be utilizing that. For YouTube, I'm going to be using the YTDLP library, right? It's basically a free open source no auth library, which allows us to scrape YouTube without having access to the YouTube API. On Polymarket also, similar to GitHub, exposes a free search endpoint. So it's using this thing called Gamma, and we're going to be using that to scrape Polymarket odds. And then Archive, as I mentioned, they also have a free API. This one we're going to be basically scraping the papers from Archive and then consolidating them into summaries that a 5th grader would be able to understand. As I mentioned, the one paid source is going to be Twitter. So Twitter is a paid API workaround, right? Instead of accessing the X official API, which costs a lot and is very hard to access, we are going to be using TwitterAPI.io, which is essentially a much cheaper API that allows us to scrape X at a fraction of the cost. And I'll give you guys a quick overview of TwitterAPI.io. Essentially, you go to this website, and you get around 10,000 credits for free, but you can obviously top them up. But every run this does, it takes around like maybe 3,000, 2,000 credits, something like that. But the credits are pretty cheap. If you go over here to pricing, you can see here it's around 15 cents per 1,000 tweets, okay? So more than you would really need for one particular run. And yeah, so you can take a look a little bit about their pricing over here if you're interested. It's TwitterAPI.io. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I just found this actually from Nate Herc. I don't know if you guys know Nate Herc, but he kind of put me on this, so I've been using this. It's pretty helpful. But yeah. Also, another thing we're going to need is, in order to actually summarize these, as I mentioned, we have the pulse check and the domain relevance. In order to actually summarize these sources into something that is tangible for us to actually read, right? So in order to get these, tangible summaries of why this stuff matters, get this consolidated summary over here, we need to access the Anthropic API, right? So in order to actually use Claude within our workflows, we're going to be needing to get the Anthropic API key so that we can do that. And in order to get an Anthropic API key, all you really need to do is go to Anthropic API over here, sign into this website, and basically just grab your API key from over here, right? You have to create one, and you also have to top it up with some credits, but it should be pretty simple to do. All right, so those are the two API keys we're going to need, right? The Twitter API.io and the Anthropic API key. But besides that, this should all be free roam. You don't need to pay for any of this. You don't need to do any of that. You may get rate limited on some of it, but since we're not running this really extensively at scale, we're just using this to get a personal summary of the market today. You don't really need to worry about rate limiting or anything like that for now. All right, so let's build out the market research aspect of this dashboard first, right? We're going to do the front end stuff later, but let's go ahead and actually just consolidate all of the information that we're looking for. So I'm going to tell Claude Code over here. All right, the goal of this project, I want to create a market research dashboard, which essentially consolidates a bunch of different sources of information to give me a comprehensive overview of what the market is looking like today for a particular topic. In this case, I want the topic to be AI news. So I want to scrape all the sources that are inside of the skill.md file that I gave you to get a comprehensive overview of what's happening in AI news today for the past week. And also output me a couple summaries, right? Output me a summary on the highest leverage thing that I should be focused on based off of all the news that you've scraped from the past week. And also give me a few bullet points on how this news can be relevant to my particular situation, right? I'm running an AI agency where I implement AI into other businesses. So I want to know exactly how this information that you scrape is relevant to that. So yeah, let's build out the market research aspect of this dashboard first. And we're going to give that over to Claude Code. Basically just prompt it similar to that, right? Just tell it the general objective that you're trying to accomplish with this after you've input the skill.md file. We haven't put in a .env file yet for our two API keys that we're going to need. So hopefully Claude is going to prompt us over here to, get it to build out the skeleton of what we're looking for, and then we can put the API keys in later. But let's just wait to see what it outputs for us over here. All right, looks like it's finished running just creating this scraper for us, and it's just going to run the 8 market research scrapers right now. So let's go ahead and let it run that, and we'll give it some time to do it. All right, so we can see here it just finished running, and we can take a quick look at our outputs folder, and it basically just has this markdown file of pretty much everything that it's scraped, right? And it looks like the one thing that it didn't scrape as we expected is Twitter API.io. So it gave us a little .env file over here for how to put our API keys in. So I'm going to go ahead and put our Twitter API key as well as our Anthropic API key so it can give us a summary of our output, and I'll come back once I've done that. All right, so I just put the 2 API keys into my .env file, and instead of running this over again and just testing it out, we already know that it works. We already know that it's going to generate us this output file. So I'm just going to create the front end right now. So how can we get this output over here? So in order to do that, we need to basically do 2 things, right? We need to push this project to GitHub, and we also need to connect that GitHub to Vercel, right? So GitHub, essentially, if you don't already know, it's a centralized place where people can collaborate on code, right? And basically, we're going to be putting this project over here into a GitHub repository so that we can deploy that repository using Vercel. And if you don't know what Vercel is, I'm inside of my Vercel dashboard right here. It's basically just a cloud platform that allows developers to instantly deploy and host websites and web applications. And so by connecting our GitHub repository to our Vercel, we can connect the actual code that's going to be used to create the website and just deploy it within the matter of a few seconds. And then a little trick that I like to do to basically connect Claude to my GitHub so I can just, deploy things really quickly is I basically take advantage of what's known as the GitHub CLI. And the GitHub CLI is basically, CLI stands for command line interface, and it allows Claude to interact with GitHub and perform actions inside of it. Okay, so it's basically similar to an MCP, but it actually uses a lot less tokens because it interacts with GitHub using terminal commands. So basically with the GitHub CLI, what it'll allow us to do is just to tell Claude in plain English, okay, create a repository with this project in it so that I can deploy it using Vercel. And so in order to use the GitHub CLI, all I have to do is really copy this terminal command to install it. You can install it whether you're using a Mac, Windows, whatever, and install it in the terminal, and then you'll be able to use the GitHub CLI. You're gonna have to log in with your authentication and everything, but it should be very straightforward, and just follow the instructions over here. You can even tell Claude to do it if you just copy this website URL into Claude and tell it to just set it up for you. So once you've downloaded the GitHub CLI, I'm basically gonna tell Claude right now, all right, Claude, I just gave you my 2 API keys inside the .env file, right? I gave you the Twitter API.io key so that you can scrape Twitter. And I also gave you my Anthropic API key so that you can do the 2 tasks that I gave you, right? I want you to summarize the sources that you scrape to a comprehensive summary of why it really matters to me. And then I also wanted you to give me some bullet points of how it's relevant to my particular situation as an AI agency owner, right? So those 2 things you should use the Anthropic API key for. And essentially, obviously, I don't want this all to just be in a markdown file, right? I want to actually deploy this to a UI that would be easy for me to visualize all of the sources that you scraped, everything that you scraped from those sources, quick sentence summary of why it's relevant to me. And also I want you to put the consolidated summary and the domain-specific summaries of why it's relevant to my AI agency on that UI as well. Build out the code for that application, and then I want you to deploy it to GitHub as a repository so that I can connect that to Vercel later on. But just build out the front-end framework for now. All right, and we're gonna go ahead and shoot off that prompt to Claude. Basically, the key summary behind that is you want to tell Claude that you want to build a front-end UI application to visualize the stuff that's inside of the AI news report markdown file, because obviously this is going to be a pain to read, so we want to just be a little bit nicer. And you're going to tell Claude to do that, and then also tell it that you want to deploy it to GitHub using the GitHub CLI that you've set up, and then eventually you want to deploy it using Vercel. So let's go ahead and let Claude run this, and we'll come back once it's finished running. All right, now we can see here it's created the code for the dashboard and has also committed the code to a new GitHub repo that it's pushed. Now it also looks like it rejected my Anthropic API key, but it was able to find a backup. So the summaries on the dashboard were written by a fallback. So let's see exactly what it outputted for us. I don't know why exactly the Anthropic API key failed, but if it was able to find a workaround for it, then we'll just let it go with that. And so now that it's created the repo inside of our GitHub, now what we can do is we can basically just deploy it with Vercel. Now, Vercel is a free platform to use, right? You can basically create and deploy web applications very quickly for free. So it's really great. Just create a new Vercel account if you don't already have one. And then once you create it, you'll be able to access this dashboard over here. And so I've already connected my Vercel to my GitHub. So connect your GitHub account to your Vercel. Once you've done that, then go over here to this Add New button, and you're going to click Project. And then within this tab over here, we can see that we have some of our projects over here. But if we want to actually import new projects from GitHub that we've just recently pushed, we're going to want to adjust our GitHub app permissions. Okay, so you're going to click down here to adjust GitHub app permissions. And I'm just going to sign in as my account. I need to verify it with my email, so I'm just going to do that really quickly. All right, then once you've verified, you can see here that we can choose which repositories we want to add. And so I'm just going to basically add the new repository that we created, right? This AI market research dashboard. And I'm going to select that repository and I'm going to save. And then that should be enough to bring that repository into our Vercel. So now when we go back to Vercel, you can see here that it's been added right here. So let's go ahead and actually import this. And we're going to create a new project over here. This all looks good, so we're just going to go ahead and deploy it. And we're just going to wait for it to deploy. It shouldn't take too long, so we're just going to wait for it to finish that and come back when it's done. All right, there we have it. Looks like it's just deployed our project. So we can actually go ahead and click into it over there. We can see here, it's basically created this whole dashboard for us, exactly like we wanted. You can see here, it essentially has a summary of exactly what are the highest leverage things that we need to focus on, right? Talking a little bit about, see, GPT 5.6, and just in general, some news here. So if you want to take a quick look at that, you can. And that also gives us some bullet points over here about what this really means for our AI agency. So these are all signals that we could use to inform our AI agency based off of actual market signals, right? So for example, it's referencing some private repo leaks that could bring some attention to, agency security audits that could be interesting to look into. Talking a little bit about here, GPT 5.6 efficiency gains. So we know that the new GPT 5.6 model is said to be more efficient than Fable in terms of token usage and costs. And so talking a little bit about how that could productize the cost of engineering. And then also obviously summarizes all the different sources that we've used, right? So it leverages Hacker News, GitHub Trending. We have all the sources over here. Archive, and we can really see for each of these sources why exactly they matter for our particular use case. If you want to tweak some of the sources over here, you can obviously find sources of your own, right? Some interesting things that you could add to this are maybe you want to scrape TikTok, maybe you want to scrape Instagram, analyze what's trending on there to better inform whatever situation you're trying to inform. But essentially just consolidate all your APIs, initialize the repo with the front-end code to GitHub, and then deploy it with Vercel. This is one of the things that I use to build out content that you see on my Instagram page, on my YouTube channel, building on my personal brand. It's been one of the most effective lead gen sources that I built out for my AI agency. If you want a little bit more information on how you can build out a personal brand of your own to land clients for your AI agency and inbound leads, then I'm going to drop a video below in the description of how exactly I've built out a compounding personal brand of 23,000 followers that I can effectively leverage to drive inbound traffic and clients for my AI agency. So that video is down below in the description. But if you like this video, like and subscribe, helps me out a lot, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.